I'm Alice, 28 female. I live in a small but comfortable apartment downtown, a little sanctuary filled with books and plants that I've curated to feel like my own. By day, I'm a data analyst for a tech firm, a job I genuinely love, where I get to find stories hidden within numbers. It's a world of logic and patterns, a stark contrast to the chaotic emotional landscape of my family life. For as long as I can remember, I've been the supporting character in their story, the quiet, reliable one who fades into the background. This is the story of how a single, cruel toast at my sister's graduation party forced me out of the shadows and into a spotlight I never asked for, revealing a devastating secret that my family had kept buried for years. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, my world had two distinct orbits, one for my sister, Sophia, and one for me. Hers was bright, loud, and celebrated. Mine was quiet, studious, and largely invisible. Sophia was the golden child, a title she earned the moment she was born. She was charming, beautiful, and effortlessly brilliant in the ways my parents understood and valued. She won debate tournaments, became prom queen, and aced every exam without seeming to break a sweat. My father, Mark, a sales director who lived and breathed charisma, saw himself in her. He paraded her accomplishments around at every family gathering, his voice booming with a pride that was almost aggressive. My mother, Helen, a quiet woman who worked as an administrative assistant, just seemed swept up in the whirlwind, her gentle support always directed toward the brightest light in the room. My achievements were different. I wasn't a social butterfly, I was a bookworm. While Sophia was at parties, I was learning to code. While she was building a network of popular friends, I was building intricate models out of data sets. My successes were quiet, cerebral things that didn't make for flashy announcements or celebratory dinners. When I won a national math competition in high school, my dad patted me on the back and said, "That's nice, honey." Did you hear Sophia was voted captain of the cheerleading squad? The trophy gathered dust on a shelf in my room, never making it to the family mantelpiece, where Sophia's debate trophies and pageant crowns gleamed under the track lighting. It wasn't that they were overtly cruel. It was a neglect so consistent and profound that it became the very architecture of our family. I learned early on not to expect applause. My role was to be the stable, low-maintenance daughter who never caused any trouble, and most importantly, never outshone Sophia. The financial dynamic of our family followed the same pattern. When it came time for college, my parents made it clear that their resources were focused on Sophia's future. "She's going to be a doctor, Alice," my father explained, as if that settled everything. "That requires a significant investment." They had saved, but it was all earmarked for Sophia's prestigious pre-med program and the subsequent astronomical costs of medical school. For me, the expectation was different. I was encouraged to apply for every scholarship imaginable, to work part-time jobs, and to take out student loans. "It will build character," my dad said with a dismissive wave, and so I did. I worked as a barista, a tutor, and a library assistant. I graduated with honors in statistics and computer science, but I also graduated with a mountain of debt that felt like my own personal, private burden. I never complained. It was simply the way things were. I got a job as a data analyst right out of college and began the slow, arduous process of chipping away at my loans. I was proud of my independence, even if it was born of necessity. My life was my own, separate from the family drama. I had my apartment, my career, and a small circle of friends who valued me for who I was. I rarely asked my parents for anything, financial or otherwise. The emotional cost was always too high. Whenever I did visit, the conversation inevitably circled back to Sophia. "Sophia just aced her organic chemistry final." "Sophia is volunteering at the free clinic." "Sophia's professor thinks she's the most promising student he's ever had." I would nod and smile, offering the requisite congratulations, feeling more like a polite acquaintance than a daughter. The person they saw wasn't me, Alice, but Sophia's sister. My professional successes were met with polite confusion. Data analyst? So you work with computers? My dad would ask, his eyes glazing over before he'd change the subject back to something tangible, something impressive, something Sophia. The culmination of all this was Sophia's medical school graduation. The event was planned with the kind of meticulous detail usually reserved for a royal wedding. My mother spent months coordinating with caterers. My father spared no expense on the venue, a grand ballroom at a historic hotel downtown. The guest list was a who's who of my parents' social circle, all people who had watched Sophia grow up, who had heard my father sing her praises for 2 decades. I was expected to be there, of course, smiling and proud. And I was proud of my sister. Despite the imbalance in our upbringing, my resentment was aimed at my parents, not her. Sophia, for her part, simply accepted the worship as her due. She wasn't malicious, just blissfully unaware of any other reality. She had never known a life outside the sun, so she couldn't comprehend what it was like to live in the shade. As I got ready for the party, choosing a simple, elegant navy dress that I knew would render me practically invisible against the opulent decor, I felt a familiar sense of resignation. It was Sophia's night. My job was just to show up, clap at the right times, and stay out of the way. I had no idea that this night, the grand finale of Sophia's lifelong celebration, would also be the beginning of the end of my silence. The ballroom was even more extravagant than I had imagined. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting a warm, golden light over dozens of round tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Everyone was dressed to the nines, their laughter and chatter filling the cavernous space. My parents were in their element, greeting guests with wide smiles. My dad, Mark, looked regal in his tailored suit, a glass of scotch always in hand, while my mom, Helen, floated beside him in a shimmering silver dress, her expression a mixture of pride and anxiety. Sophia was, of course, the radiant center of it all. She wore a stunning emerald green gown that highlighted her fiery red hair, and she moved through the room with an easy grace, accepting congratulations like a queen receiving her subjects. I found my assigned table near the back, tucked away behind a large floral arrangement. It was a strategic placement, I suspected, designed to keep me present but not prominent. I shared the table with a few distant cousins and some of my parents' older friends who offered me polite, if forgettable, pleasantries. My Uncle David, my mother's brother, was also there. He shot me a warm, knowing smile as I sat down. David was the only one in the family who ever seemed to see me. A retired accountant, he was a man of quiet observation, much like myself. "You look lovely, Alice," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the sea of noise. "How's work?" We chatted for a while about my latest project, and for a few minutes I felt seen. He listened intently, asking smart questions, his interest genuine. It was a brief respite before the main event began. After about an hour of mingling, my father stepped up to the small stage at the front of the room, tapping a spoon against his champagne glass to get everyone's attention. The room fell into a respectful hush. He beamed, his chest puffed out with pride, and began his speech. It started predictably enough, with thanks to the guests for coming and a few charming anecdotes about Sophia's childhood. He talked about her first steps, her first A+ report card, her unwavering determination to become a doctor. The crowd listened, captivated. I watched from my corner, a passive observer at my own family's celebration. From the moment she was born, we knew Sophia was special, my father declared, his voice thick with emotion. She has a fire in her, a drive that is truly remarkable. She has never disappointed us, not once. He looked over at Sophia, who was seated at the head table with her closest friends, and she preened under his praise, dabbing at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief. My mother looked on, her face a mask of pure adoration. I felt a familiar pang in my chest, that dull ache of invisibility that had been my constant companion for 28 years. I took a sip of my water, bracing myself for the grand finale of his speech. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. My father raised his glass high, his eyes sweeping the room. He paused for dramatic effect, a showman to the very end. "And so," he boomed, his gaze sweeping past my table without a flicker of recognition. "I ask you all to join me in raising a glass to my brilliant daughter, Sophia. To a future doctor, Mark, and to, finally, someone in this family worth celebrating." The words hit me like a physical blow. Finally, someone in this family worth celebrating. He hadn't just forgotten me, he had actively erased me. In that single sentence, he had dismissed my entire existence, my struggles, my accomplishments, everything I had built for myself. A wave of laughter rippled through the room. It wasn't malicious, not from most people. It was the polite, appreciative laughter of a crowd enjoying a well-delivered, if slightly edgy, punchline. They assumed it was a joke, a bit of fatherly hyperbole. But I knew it wasn't. I could see it in the smug satisfaction on my father's face and the way Sophia giggled, accepting the compliment without a second thought for its implication. My mother just smiled, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant of the cruelty in her husband's words. I sat frozen in my chair, the laughter echoing in my ears. My face grew hot and I could feel the blood draining from it at the same time. The room suddenly felt suffocating, the air thick and heavy. I looked around, and for a brief moment a few people caught my eye. Their laughter faltered, replaced by expressions of pity or awkwardness as they realized who the butt of the joke was. They quickly looked away, turning back to their conversations, eager to move on from the uncomfortable moment. I was a piece of social shrapnel they wanted to avoid. In that corner, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 similar slights, something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic shatter, but a quiet, definitive snap. The resignation I had lived with for so long was suddenly gone, replaced by a cold, clear anger. It wasn't just about the toast. It was about the college fund that never existed for me. It was about the forgotten achievements and the endless, exhausting praise for my sister. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being treated like a footnote in my own family's story. I looked at my father, still basking in the glow of his speech, and then at my sister, who was now hugging him, both of them oblivious to the wound they had just inflicted. I sat there quietly, my hands clenched in my lap under the table. They all thought I would just take it, that I would absorb this humiliation like I had absorbed all the others. They thought I would remain silent in my corner, but they were wrong. The celebration continued around me, but for me, the party was over. A different kind of event was about to begin, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was going to be the one to orchestrate it. The drive home from the party was a silent movie of city lights blurring past my window. The cold fury that had solidified in my chest at the party hadn't dissipated. It had sharpened, honing itself into a single, piercing point of clarity. My father's words, "Finally, someone in this family worth celebrating," played on a loop in my head. It was the casual, public cruelty of it that I couldn't shake. He hadn't just thought it, he had announced it to a room full of people, turning my private pain into a public spectacle. When I walked into my apartment and shut the door, the silence was a relief. Here, in my own space, I could finally breathe. For the next few days, I went through the motions of life. I went to work, analyzed my data sets, attended meetings, and spoke to my colleagues. But my mind was elsewhere. It was replaying every conversation, every dismissive comment, every financial decision my parents had ever made. The narrative they had so carefully constructed, that Sophia's path was simply more expensive and therefore required more resources, had always felt unfair, but I had accepted it as a fact of life. Now it felt like a lie. Why had it been so absolute? Why was there nothing for me? My parents weren't poor. My father had a high-paying job, and they lived in a large, comfortable house in the suburbs. It didn't add up. The catalyst for my investigation came from an unexpected place, a stray piece of mail. About a week after the party, I stopped by my parents' house to pick up a box of old childhood books I had promised a friend for her daughter. My mother was the only one home, and our interaction was brief and strained. She avoided my eyes, busying herself with dusting an already spotless shelf. She knew. She must have known how hurtful my father's words were, but true to form, she chose silence over confrontation. As I was leaving, I noticed a stack of mail on the hall table. On top was a thick, formal-looking envelope addressed to my parents from the Harrison Foundation. The name didn't ring a bell, but it looked important. I glanced at my mom, who was now in the kitchen. On a strange impulse I can't fully explain, I slipped the envelope off the top of the pile and put it in my purse. Back in my apartment, I stared at the envelope for a long time, my heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and trepidation. This was a line I had never crossed, but my father's toast had redrawn all the lines. I carefully steamed the envelope open over my kettle, my hands shaking slightly. Inside was a letter and a donation summary. The letter was a formal thank you note from the foundation for my parents, continued and generous support. It mentioned their esteemed status as platinum-level donors and invited them to an upcoming charity gala. The attached summary was a list of their donations for the past fiscal year. My eyes scanned the numbers, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. They had donated thousands of dollars, a significant amount, far more than I would have expected. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the name of the fund their donations were directed to, the Harrison Foundation Scholarship for Aspiring Medical Professionals. My parents were major donors to a medical school scholarship fund, the same kind of fund they had told me didn't exist for people like them to benefit from. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but the real discovery was at the bottom of the page in a small, almost unnoticeable footnote. It detailed a specific, named scholarship established by a primary benefactor, the Alice Markwell Memorial Scholarship, established in 2010. Alice Markwell, my name, except for one crucial, horrifying word, memorial. A memorial scholarship is one established in the name of someone who has passed away. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. 2010. That was the year I started high school. I frantically searched for the Harrison Foundation online. Their website was professional and detailed. I found the page for their scholarship programs, and after a few clicks, I found it. The Alice Markwell Memorial Scholarship. The description was brief. A full-ride scholarship awarded annually to an exceptional female student entering a medical degree program. Established in memory of Alice Markwell, a beloved daughter with a passion for helping others, whose life was tragically cut short. I had to read it 3 times before the words fully registered. A beloved daughter, tragically cut short. I was alive. I was sitting right there in my apartment, breathing. What did this mean? My first thought was that it had to be a different Alice Markwell. A bizarre, tragic coincidence. But the name, my exact name, connected to my parents, it was too specific. I dug deeper. The foundation's site listed major benefactors, and there they were, Mark and Helen, my parents. There was no photo, just their names listed under the platinum donors. A cold dread washed over me as a terrible, unthinkable possibility began to take shape in my mind. I thought back to my childhood, searching for a clue, any clue, and then I remembered something. A conversation I had overheard when I was very young, maybe 7 or 8. My parents were arguing behind their closed bedroom door. Their voices were muffled, but I had heard my mother crying, and I heard my father say something sharp and angry about a trust and her money. I had asked my mom what was wrong later, and she had just hugged me tightly and said it was grown-up business. I had forgotten all about it until now. What if the money they were donating wasn't theirs? What if it was mine? The pieces started to click into place with horrifying speed. A trust fund. Her money. A scholarship created in my name, but as a memorial. It was a story so monstrous it felt like something out of a novel. Had my parents taken money that was meant for me, declared me metaphorically dead to whomever the money came from, and then used it to build a legacy for themselves while simultaneously funding the education of my worthier sister? It was an insane theory, but it was the only one that fit the facts I had in front of me. The foundation thought I was dead, and my parents were the ones who had told them that. The depth of the betrayal was staggering, a chasm that opened up right under my feet. The toast at the party wasn't just an insult, it was a confession. In their eyes, I really wasn't worth celebrating, because the only version of me that was useful to them was the one that was gone. The discovery of the memorial scholarship sent me into a state of shock, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, methodical resolve. I was a data analyst. My job was to take disparate pieces of information, find the pattern, and uncover the truth. I was going to apply that same skill set to my own life. I needed proof, concrete evidence that would leave no room for doubt or denial. My parents had built their perfect family facade on a foundation of lies, and I was going to find every single crack. My first and most valuable resource was Uncle David. As a retired accountant, he knew his way around financial documents, and more importantly, he was the only person in the family I trusted implicitly. I called him the next day, my voice carefully neutral, and asked if he could meet me for coffee. I told him I needed some advice on financial planning, a plausible excuse that wouldn't raise any alarms. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. For the first 10 minutes, we made small talk, but he could tell something was wrong. His kind, perceptive eyes studied my face. "Alice, what's really going on?" he asked gently. "You've seemed different since the party." Taking a deep breath, I pushed the printouts from the Harrison Foundation website across the table. I told him everything: the toast, the stolen letter, the memorial scholarship in my name. I watched his face as he read, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief and finally to a quiet, simmering anger that mirrored my own. He looked up from the page, his glasses perched on his nose, and his gaze was firm. "This is unconscionable," he said, his voice low. "A memorial scholarship for a living person? That's not just immoral, that sounds like fraud." His validation was like a dam breaking inside me. I wasn't crazy. This was as wrong as I thought it was. "I think there's more," I said, telling him about the overheard conversation from my childhood, the mention of a trust. "I need to find out where this money came from." David nodded, his mind already working. "A trust would have a source, a legal document establishing it. Usually it's from a grandparent or other relative in a will. Did any of your grandparents leave you anything?" I thought back. My father's parents had passed away when I was a baby and had left very little. My mother's father was the same. But her mother, my grandmother Eleanor, the woman I was named after, my mom's mom, was different. She had been a sharp, independent woman who owned a successful small business. She had adored me. She passed away when I was 6. My parents had always been vague about her will, just saying she had left the family comfortable. "My maternal grandmother," I said. "Grandma Eleanor." David's eyes lit up with recognition. "Of course, Eleanor was a savvy woman. She wouldn't have left your future to chance." He explained that if she had established a trust for me in her will, the will itself would be a public record at the county courthouse. It was the first solid lead I had. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and went to the courthouse archives. After an hour of navigating the arcane filing system, I found it. My grandmother's last will and testament, filed 22 years ago. I sat in a dusty corner of the records room and read the document that would change my life. The legal language was dense, but the core of it was clear. My grandmother had left the bulk of her estate to my mother, but she had also set up a separate, irrevocable trust fund specifically for me, her only granddaughter at the time. The amount was staggering. It was a sum that would have paid for my college education 10 times over, with plenty left for a down payment on a house, a start in life, anything I wanted. The trust was to be managed by my parents, Mark and Helen, as trustees, until I turned 25, at which point I was to assume full control. I was 28. I had never received a cent. I had never even been told it existed. My hands were trembling as I read the clause again. My parents were the trustees. They had a fiduciary duty, a legal obligation, to act in my best interest. Instead, they had hidden the trust's existence from me, and apparently, had been siphoning off the funds for years. The next piece of the puzzle was connecting the trust to the Harrison Foundation. How did they justify moving the money? I needed bank records, trust statements. David explained that as the beneficiary, I now had the legal right to request all records related to the trust. The problem was, I didn't know which bank held the account, so I started with a different approach. I went back to the Harrison Foundation. This time, I didn't go as Alice, the forgotten daughter. I crafted a careful email to their donations department, posing as a freelance journalist writing a story on local philanthropists. I praised the work of the foundation and mentioned I was profiling several key donors, including Mark and Helen, for their generous establishment of the Alice Markwell Memorial Scholarship. I asked if they could confirm the year the scholarship was founded and the initial endowment amount for fact-checking purposes. It was a long shot, but it worked. A friendly development officer replied a day later. She was thrilled at the prospect of a positive story. She confirmed the scholarship was established in 2010 with a substantial five-figure endowment. She also mentioned, in passing, something that made my heart stop. "Mark and Helen were so brave," she wrote. "To take their grief and turn it into such a positive legacy after the tragic car accident that took their daughter is just so inspiring." A car accident. They had invented a cause of death. They had built an entire, detailed narrative around my fictional demise. The cold, calculated nature of the deception was breathtaking, but the email contained one more crucial detail. She mentioned the endowment was transferred from a specific regional bank, Sterling Trust Bank. That was the key I needed. With the will proving I was the beneficiary and the bank's name, I had a path forward. My Uncle David helped me draft a formal letter to Sterling Trust Bank's legal department. Citing the terms of my grandmother's will, I identified myself as the beneficiary of the trust and formally requested a complete accounting of the fund from its inception to the present day. I sent the letter via certified mail, the crisp thud of the postal worker's stamp sealing the first official act of my rebellion. The cracks in the facade were no longer just visible, they were starting to spread. The whole rotten structure was about to come crashing down. The 2 weeks I spent waiting for the bank's response were the longest of my life. Every day was a battle between crippling anxiety and a burning, righteous anger. I continued my routine, a ghost in my own life, all the while knowing this storm was gathering just over the horizon. During this time, I focused on what I could control. I meticulously organized the evidence I had: a certified copy of my grandmother's will, the printouts from the foundation's website, the email from their development officer, and the certified mail receipt for my request to the bank. I was building a case, just like a lawyer would, laying each piece of evidence out in a clear, undeniable sequence. My data-driven mind found comfort in the structure, in the cold, hard facts. When the package from Sterling Trust Bank finally arrived, it felt heavy, not just with paper, but with the weight of 22 years of deceit. I took it to Uncle David's house. I couldn't open it alone. We sat at his dining room table, a pot of coffee brewing, and opened the thick envelope. Inside were years of statements, a dense forest of numbers and transactions. For the next 3 hours, David, with his accountant's eye, walked me through it. The story the numbers told was even worse than I had imagined. The trust had been managed correctly for the first few years. But then, in 2010, the same year the Memorial Scholarship was established, the pattern of activity changed dramatically. A large sum, the exact amount of the initial endowment mentioned in the foundation's email, was withdrawn. From that point on, there was a steady, consistent stream of withdrawals. There were payments made directly to Sophia's exclusive private high school. There were transfers that coincided with luxury family vacations I was never invited on because I had to work. There were huge sums moved outright before Sophia started her expensive pre-med program. They hadn't just used the money for the scholarship. They had been using my inheritance as their personal slush fund for years, funding Sophia's golden life with the money my grandmother had left for me. The most damning evidence was the annual reports the trustees were required to file. In each one, my father, as the primary trustee, had signed a declaration stating that the beneficiary, me, was in good standing, but that the funds were being invested on her behalf for long-term growth. After 2010, the language changed. A formal letter was filed with the bank, on my father's corporate letterhead, informing them of my tragic and untimely death in a car accident. A forged death certificate was attached. I stared at the grainy photocopy. My name, my birth date, and a date of death. It was the most surreal and sickening thing I had ever seen. They had forged an official document to declare me dead so they could gain unrestricted access to the money. This wasn't just a family betrayal. This was a series of serious crimes. Forgery, fraud, embezzlement. "They could go to jail for this, Alice," David said, his voice grim. "This is beyond a family dispute. This is criminal. The thought sent a chill through me, but it didn't deter me. They had built their entire world on my erasure. They had celebrated Sophia's success, a success paid for with my future. The laughter at the party now seemed infinitely more sinister. They were laughing at a ghost who had conveniently funded their perfect life. Now that I had the proof, the question was what to do with it. I could hire a lawyer. I could go to the police. Both were options I kept in my back pocket. But a quiet, legal resolution felt insufficient. It wouldn't address the core wound, the public humiliation, the emotional annihilation I had suffered my whole life, culminating in that toast. They had publicly dishonored me. I decided I needed to publicly reclaim my story. They had used a celebration for Sophia to deliver their final, cruelest blow. It was only fitting that I use a celebration of my own to deliver the truth. My plan began to form. My 29th birthday was in a few weeks. It was normally a quiet affair, a dinner with a few friends. This year, it was going to be different. I decided to host a party. Not just any party, but a career and future celebration, as I would call it. The pretense was that I had received a major promotion at work, a lie, but a benign one compared to theirs. It would provide the perfect cover. I booked the private dining room at one of the nicest restaurants in the city, a place my parents loved, a place they would feel compelled to attend. To keep up appearances. I sent out elegant, formal invitations via email. I invited my entire extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, the same people who had witnessed my humiliation at Sophia's party. I invited my parents' close friends, the ones who had laughed at my father's joke. And of course, I invited Mark, Helen, and Sophia. To ensure they would come, I made a special phone call to my mother. I played the part of the dutiful, forgiving daughter. "Mom," I said, my voice bright and cheerful, "I know things have been awkward since Sophia's party, but I don't want there to be any bad blood. I have some really wonderful news, and I'd love for you all to be there to celebrate with me." I could hear the relief in her voice. The conflict-averse woman was desperate to smooth things over, to pretend nothing had happened. "Of course, sweetheart. We wouldn't miss it for the world," she promised. The stage was set. I created a simple slideshow presentation, the kind one might show at a corporate meeting. It was filled with charts and graphs summarizing my career achievements, but interspersed within the corporate speak were other slides, scans of my grandmother's will, the trust account statements with the withdrawals highlighted in red, the forged death certificate, the mission statement of the Alice Markwell Memorial Scholarship. Each slide was a nail I was about to hammer into the coffin of their lies. I was terrified, my hands shaking every time I rehearsed my speech in front of my mirror. But my fear was eclipsed by a sense of absolute purpose. They had written me out of their story. Now, I was going to write myself back in, with an ending they would never see coming. The night of my celebration arrived, cloaked in a tense, electric atmosphere. I stood near the entrance of the private dining room, greeting guests as they arrived. I wore a sharp, crimson-red dress, a color of power and defiance, a deliberate contrast to the invisible navy blue I'd worn to Sophia's party. One by one, they trickled in. My cousins, my aunts, my parents' friends, all offering congratulations on my fictional promotion. They were unsuspecting, ready for a pleasant evening of dinner and drinks. Then my family arrived. My father, Mark, walked in with his usual air of ownership, clapping me on the shoulder with a booming, "There's the career girl, making your old man proud." The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. Sophia gave me an awkward air kiss, murmuring something about being so happy for me. My mother, Helen, simply hugged me, her embrace feeling fragile and desperate, a silent plea for everything to just be normal again. They took their seats at the main table I had reserved for them, front and center. Uncle David was the last to arrive. He gave my hand a firm, reassuring squeeze. "You ready for this?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It's time," I whispered back. The room was filled with about 40 people. The lighting was low, the chatter was warm, and a waiter was just beginning to pour wine. It was the perfect picture of a happy family celebration. A perfect lie. I stepped up to the small lectern at the front of the room, where a projector screen hung behind me, currently displaying a simple title slide. Alice's next chapter. Good evening, everyone, I began, my voice surprisingly steady. Thank you all so much for coming. It means the world to have you here. I smiled, making eye contact with a few friendly faces in the crowd. I know the invitation mentioned a promotion, and while I am doing very well in my career, the real reason I gathered you all here tonight is to celebrate a different kind of milestone. It's a story about family, legacy, and setting the record straight. My parents exchanged a slightly confused look. Sophia was already looking bored, scrolling through her phone under the table. As many of you know, I continued, a few weeks ago we were all together celebrating my sister Sophia's incredible achievement of graduating from medical school. I nodded towards her. And at that party, my father gave a very memorable toast. He said he was proud to finally have someone in this family worth celebrating. A few nervous coughs rippled through the room as people remembered the awkward moment. My father's face tightened, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. That comment, I said, letting the words hang in the air, started me on a journey of discovery. It made me wonder what a person has to do to be considered worth celebrating. And what I found was that, in my family, it has less to do with who you are and more to do with how you can be used. I clicked the remote and the first slide appeared. It was a beautiful, smiling photo of my grandmother Alina. This is my grandmother. She was a wonderful woman who loved me very much. When she passed away, she left a significant trust fund in my name to ensure I would have a secure start in life. The room W. As silent now, my parents had frozen, their smiles gone. This trust was meant to pay for my education and help me build my future. I was supposed to receive it when I turned 25. I clicked again. The next slide showed a scanned image of the clause from her will, the text highlighted in yellow. My parents, Mark and Helen, were the trustees. All eyes darted towards my parents. My father's face was turning a blotchy red. My mother looked like she was about to faint. Strangely, I said, my voice dripping with irony, I never saw a penny of that money. Instead, I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college and graduated with over $80,000 in student loan debt, which I have been diligently paying off myself for the last 6 years. I clicked again. A simple bar chart appeared, one bar showing the balance of my trust fund, the other showing the balance of my student loans. The visual was stark and damning. So where did the money go? I asked the quiet room. I was curious too. The next slide showed the logo of the Harrison Foundation. I discovered my parents are platinum-level donors to this foundation. Very impressive. They even have a scholarship named after me. I paused, then looked directly at my father. The Alice Markwell Memorial Scholarship. A collective gasp went through the room. A memorial scholarship, I repeated, letting the words sink in. Which is strange, because as you can all see, I am very much alive. I clicked through the final slides in quick succession. The bank statements with Sophia's school tuition payments highlighted. The family vacation photos from trips I wasn't on. And then, the final, devastating image, the forged death certificate. My mother let out a small, strangled sob and covered her face with her hands. My father shot up from his chair. That's enough, he roared, his voice cracking. This is a private family matter. Was it a private family matter when you publicly humiliated me? I shot back, my voice ringing with a power I never knew I possessed. Was it private when you stole my inheritance to fund my sister's life? When you declared me dead to a bank so you could get your hands on the rest of the money? You didn't just steal from me. You erased me. I turned to the rest of the room. The life you all celebrated for my sister, her prestigious education, her bright future, it was all funded by a lie. A lie paid for with money my grandmother left for me. The silence was absolute, broken only by my mother's quiet weeping. Sophia looked shell-shocked, her face pale, staring at our father as if seeing him for the first time. The guests, our family, our friends, were looking at my parents with expressions of pure horror and disgust. The perfect facade had not just cracked, it had been obliterated, and all that was left was the ugly, rotten truth. The moments after my speech felt like a vacuum. The air had been sucked out of the room, leaving only a stunned, suffocating silence. My father stood there, his face a mask of fury and shame, his finger still pointing at me. My mother was openly weeping, her shoulders shaking. Sophia just stared at the forged death certificate on the screen, her mouth slightly agape, as if she couldn't process the information. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, people started to get up. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic confrontations. Just the quiet scrape of chairs, the murmur of hushed apologies, and the averted eyes of guests making a hasty retreat. They didn't want to be associated with the ugliness that had been exposed. Within 10 minutes, the room was half empty. My parents' friends, the ones who had laughed at the toast, were the first to leave. My Uncle David walked to the front of the room and stood beside me, a silent, solid show of support. One of my aunts came up, hugged me tightly, and whispered, "I am so sorry, Alice, we never knew." The family was fracturing right before my eyes, dividing into those who were horrified on my behalf and those who were just horrified by the scene. Finally, only my parents and Sophia remained, sitting amidst the debris of their ruined reputation. My father was the first to speak, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "How could you do this? In front of everyone, you've ruined us." It was the most telling response he could have given. Not, "I'm sorry," or "How can we fix this?" but an accusation. His only concern was the public shame, not the private crime. "You ruined yourselves," I replied, my voice devoid of the anger I felt before, leaving only a cold, empty finality. "You did this. Every single choice, every lie, every dollar you stole. This is just the consequences." My mother looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Alice, we just wanted the best for Sophia. Her school was so expensive. And what about what was best for me?" I asked, the question hanging unanswered in the air. Sophia finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Is I. T true, my education, was it all from her money?" She looked from me to our father, her eyes pleading for a different answer. When my father just stared back at her, his jaw clenched, she got her answer. The golden child's pedestal had crumbled into dust beneath her feet. The foundation of her entire life, her celebrated success, was a fraud. She looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see a rival or a queen. I just saw a confused, lost young woman, another victim of our parents' manipulations. I didn't wait for more excuses or accusations. With Uncle David by my side, I walked out of that restaurant and didn't look back. The next day, guided by my uncle, I met with a lawyer who specialized in trust and estate fraud. When he saw the evidence, the will, the bank statements, the forged death certificate, he was confident. He laid out my options. I could press criminal charges or I could pursue a civil settlement. The thought of putting my parents in jail was a heavy one, but the thought of letting them get away with it was heavier. In the end, I chose a path that prioritized justice and recovery over pure vengeance. My lawyer sent a demand letter to my parents, laying out the full extent of their fraud and embezzlement. It stated that if they did not agree to a full and immediate repayment of the entire trust, including projected investment gains over the years, and an additional sum for damages, we would turn the entire case file over to the district attorney. Faced with the undeniable proof and the very real threat of prison, they capitulated. They had to sell their large, comfortable house, the one filled with Sophia's trophies. My father had to cash out his entire retirement fund. They had to liquidate every asset they had to make me whole. The settlement was finalized out of court, and the money, my money, was transferred to a new account in my name. The fallout was immense. My father lost his job when the scandal inevitably leaked. His reputation as a charismatic leader was shattered. They moved into a small rental apartment, their social circle gone, their status evaporated. I have not spoken to them since that night. My mother has sent a few tearful, rambling emails, full of excuses and self-pity, but never a true apology. I haven't replied. The most surprising outcome was my relationship with Sophia. About a month after the party, she called me. She was crying. She apologized, deeply and sincerely, not just for the money, but for her own blindness, for her passive acceptance of the family narrative. She told me she was getting therapy to understand the dysfunctional dynamic she had been raised in. She had taken a job as a resident at a community hospital in another state, determined to build a life on her own terms, with her own money. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's a start. We talk occasionally, two survivors of the same shipwreck, trying to figure out how to build new rafts. As for me, the first thing I did with the money was pay off my student loans in one lump sum. I watched the balance drop to zero and felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had carried for years. I set up a proper investment portfolio, bought my apartment instead of renting, and established a new scholarship at my alma mater, this one reel in my grandmother's name. It feels like the best way to honor her legacy. The money hasn't made me happy, but it has given me freedom. The freedom to live without debt, to travel, to feel secure. But the real freedom came from speaking the truth. I am no longer the quiet girl in the corner. I am the architect of my own life, the main character in my own story. And finally, I am someone worth celebrating.